Hey everyone, Lex here yet again with yet another warrior build video, but this time we're in Dawn of the Hunt. So if you've watched the last video I made, or maybe you figured this out on your own, shield skills were buffed in the last patch and they are feeling really good. Not even kidding, look, right now I'm not even spec'd into any weapon boosting passive skills or rolls. I am all in on my shield damage and it is feeling so good for maps. This was mostly the case when going through the campaign too, although obviously you don't have all of your skills right from level 1, so you do have to rely on some of your weapon skills for early game progress. I mean, it all basically hinges on how quickly you can prime things for stun and crank out bone shatters, but even then, once you start getting those strong shield skills, you can transition over to this shield-centric playstyle pretty early on. So in this video, I'm going to go over my current Smith of Kitava build for progressing in the endgame, but also touch upon the leveling process for any warriors interested in how I got started. I'll basically give you like an abridged version of the skills I used and snapshots of what my passive skill tree looked like at those earlier levels. But right now, the build feels amazing for speedy mapping, and I'm honestly excited to share it with you because it's actually some of the most fun I've had on the class thus far. You know, I'm really enjoying myself right now. If you guys are here for the endgame mapping stuff, you can obviously skip the leveling and early game part of this video. Just click on the chapter you want to see. But for now, that's enough small talk. Let's get into it. So this time around, leveling did feel a bit rougher at first, but I eventually found something that worked very well for me. Again, as I said earlier, most of your playthrough, if you're sticking with mace skills, it's going to focus on queuing up groups of mobs for bone shatters, which is your main crowd clearing ability when you prime things for stun. However, when it comes to bossing, things are a bit different. Like obviously, Mace Strike is your main way to deal damage during the earliest moments of your playthrough, but as you get things like Perfect Strike and even Shield Charge at this point, that's when your playthrough starts taking off. But yeah, as I said earlier, when you just start out, you don't have a ton of skill variety. It honestly boils down to smacking things with Mace Strike or using Rolling Slam, and I know it's a popular choice to use the first hit of Rolling Slam and then animation cancel to prime a bunch of enemies for stun, so that's something you can do, but I think it stops consistently working at some point, at least if you're using a one-hander. If you're using a two-hander, it's more consistent if I'm remembering correctly. Either way, between those options, find a way that works for you to queue things up for bone shatters in the early game. Alright, I decided to rearrange my skill gems to just show you guys more accurately what they look like early on. Obviously, Fire Spell on hit is not there very early, so just ignore that one for now. For Mace Strike auto attacks, the early game support gems I had were Rage and Martial Tempo, slotted in that order. Again, early on you'll be using this a ton as your main DPS source, so it's easy to build up the Rage buff, and Martial Tempo helps you build it up faster. Then obviously, as you all probably know by now, when you see things primed for stun, that's when you bone shatter, and you want to socket that with Impact Shockwave and Magnified Effect as soon as you can to assist with your crowd clearing. And as you all know, I love Magma Barrier, and that's the first spirit ability I went with when I defeated King in the Mists again. It has been nerfed heavily in the end game, but it still hits really hard, and it's definitely not useless. In fact, it's actually been improved for the early game. I basically used this ability with Raised Shield for clearing in Act 1 until I hit Act 2, and was able to get Resonating Shield, which also activates Magma Barrier. And then that was what I was using as my main way to prime things for bone shatters if they weren't outright killed by Magma Barrier. And for support gems, I had Fire Infusion and eventually Reach socketed into Magma Barrier. Reach looks kind of rough at first with the accuracy decrease, but we'll talk later about how we get rid of that downside completely in the passive skill tree. You can probably guess how. I also socketed Resonating Shield with Overpower, and I switched the Rage gem actually down here as well, as it became my main way to prime things for stun and just to hit things. Honestly, it just felt really good, and you get some juicy bone shatters with how well it had primed things. And the Armor Break effect is amazing for the Exploit Weakness support gem, which should be in your heaviest hitting ability, whether it be Perfect Strike or Shield Charge, but I'm getting ahead of myself actually. This is Act 2 stuff. Let's get back to two of the most important abilities you get in Act 1, which is Shield Charge and Perfect Strike. Early on, Perfect Strike beats out Shield Charge as the main thing you should be hitting bosses with, but once you find yourself a shield with a lot of armor, I think for pretty much every boss I was prioritizing Shield Charge to build up heavy stuns and dealing damage, and whenever it was on cooldown I was filling the gaps with Perfect Strike. But that was a playstyle that emerged during Act 3 and my Cruel campaign playthrough. I think at first you should still prioritize Perfect Strike spam until you start noticing the damage falling off and your Shield Charge starts hitting harder. For support gem sockets on Perfect Strike, I moved Martial Tempo down here to decrease the channeling time and window of opportunity for a big damage increase, as long as you're timing it right, but that's, this ability is useless if you aren't timing it right, so make sure that you are. And for Shield Charge, I was actually using Stomping Ground, which is a good chunk of damage and stun buildup, and Concentrated Effect obviously to boost the damage even more. Just again, note that Shield Charge will only hit hard if you have a relatively high armor shield, so try to keep an eye out on those vendors for a good one if you're having trouble finding one on your own, or I guess you could trade for one, but I didn't really touch trade until the end game. Alright, last two skills I'll mention are Infernal Cry and Molten Blast. I mean, Infernal Cry is strong as hell, and you should be using this to not only empower your perfect strikes during boss fights, but also your shield charges. Shield charge, I think, is the only shield ability that can be empowered, and it hits really hard when it is, so take advantage of that. And don't forget, as a bonus, that you can empower more than one hit if you're using Magma Barrier to build up endurance charges. Infernal Cry also assists in clearing groups. Even in the endgame, I'll use it often for this purpose and to snipe a rare or something. Just make sure you're actually hitting things with a shout, or else it won't boost up your damage. And as far as early game supports, I think I just had premeditation socketed here just to increase the damage it gave you. I mean, I think that's the most important one. Some better ones come later. And I gotta say, I was really surprised by Molten Blast. It is honestly a really strong stun primer at a range. And I actually socketed this with Scattershot, as you can see here, while leveling up, and as well as Primal Armament, because this was enough, socketed like this, even with a one-handed weapon, to prime things for a Bone Shatter in one use. And that's the main thing you should use it for, is priming things for stun at a range. If you are up close, Molten Blast won't prime things quite as well, so it felt really nice having this ranged option to do so. Or if things run up to you, you can just use Resonating Shield instead if you want to queue things up for Bone Shatters that way. So we have all these options at any distance that works. You know, it felt really good while I was leveling and made a lot of campaign zones a breeze. But I don't want to spend this whole video talking about the early game. I will briefly go over some snapshots of what my passive skill tree looked like in the early to mid game later on in this video, but for now let's go over what my current map grinding build is looking like. Alright, so quite a bit I went over in the last section is relevant to this section, but obviously as you unlock more support gem slots and you get more skills and get better equipment, a lot of things change. I think some of the biggest changes are, right off the bat, well, I just don't use Perfect Strike anymore. I'm basically barely hitting things with my mace at this point. I'm literally all in on my shield because this is all this build needs at this point. A high armor shield, and you'll be clearing maps and nuking bosses so easily with this setup. Oh, and a quick note, I'm actually using Trampletoes again. It's actually still quite useful as a map clearing assist, and is still honestly relatively cheap, so this is one of the first things I bought alongside a decently high armor shield, but we'll go into more details on my gear in a later section. For now, let's go over what the current skill setup is looking like. Alright, first up is Raised Shield and the new Shield Bash. Honestly, this is a good early game option, but it fell off pretty quick for me, honestly, as I was using Resonating Shield or Magma Barrier for group clearing, and for bossing, honestly, Shield Charge is pretty much all the stun build-up I need. But don't get me wrong, this is a very good skill for the early game. I just don't really use it anymore. I'd rather just Shield Charge at this point for more damage and stun build-up. Maybe there's a way to crank this up again, but for now, I'm just not feeling it. And I just have one support gem, Unbreakable, socketed here. This is just a placeholder until I, get some more Jeweler's Orbs and, unlock some more sockets for the other skills. And then we have Mace Strike. I mean, I pretty much never use this anymore either. I have Culling Strike here, but I rarely have the opportunity to use it since bosses are dying pretty quickly. All right, so let's talk about Fire Spell on Hit from the Smith of Kitava Ascendancy. Everyone. So, the downside of this skill is that you need a lot of intelligence to cast any meaningful high-level fire spells, so that's unfortunate. But I went with a lower gem level of Solar Orb here, since even though the fire damage isn't really that impressive, it still has a guaranteed chance to ignite, so I found that useful as we were running some pretty hardcore plus damage to burning or ignited enemy nodes and the passive skill tree. But yeah, basically to sum up how Fire Spell on Hit works is that as you hit things with melee attacks, which is everything we do, including Magma Barrier, you build up energy, and once this energy is at 100%, the socketed spell automatically casts. Funnily enough, at least with Solar Orb, other higher cast time spells might take more energy to cast, but Solar Orb will cast immediately after every shield charge. So with my current setup, I am getting Solar Orb every time I charge. And real quick, let's go over the support gems. I have Energy Retention here and Impetus. Impetus makes more sense because you're gaining more energy as you're doing the melee attacks with this ability. Energy Retention I'm not sure about. I feel like I'm getting enough energy already, but this will help you retain energy after the spell triggers so that you can cast it again, ideally in a quicker time since you've retained 35% of the energy. But again, Shield Charge is giving us so much energy, I don't know if I'm actually getting that much use out of this one. So I might swap that out with something else, honestly. But Font of Rage is here, and this is interesting because every time you cast a Solar Orb, this is basically becoming a rage generator. So if you can, keep it in your mind to fight near a Solar Orb once it forms, because you're just going to be gaining rage the longer you're fighting around that thing, and that means you're going to be doing more damage. It's got some synergy with other support gems that we have in this build, etc. But yeah, Fire Spell spell on hit overall. I really want to make this work, so I may invest some more intelligence into this build and see what other fire spells we can play around with in this spot. Alright, so real quick, I'll talk about Bone Shatter again. It's pretty much the same purpose as before. It's still surprisingly hitting hard, even without investing a lot of stuff towards mace strike or attack skills or weapon skills, you know, etc. It's a good mop-up tool at this point if there are any stragglers left behind in like a big clear and that are primed for stun. It's pretty much socketed the same, though the one important socket that I'll mention here is Devastate. So we now fully break armor upon inflicting a heavy stun. You know, when things are primed for stun, we use this. So now we fully break armor, and that's really important for a combo that we kind of have later. Next, we have Time of Need. If you've been watching this channel, you know I really like this aura. I think the timed heals have saved me a bunch of times. It also removes curses when it goes off, so we have it socketed with Fast Forward here so that it goes off more often. And then we have it socketed with other quintessential spirit support gems, you know, Vitality, so that we're regenerating 1% of our life per second, and Herbalism, so that we're getting 30% more of an effect from our life flasks when, you know, healing up. So both really important. I think every build should be probably running these. All right, guys, let's talk about Shield Charge. This thing is hitting. If you've seen my previous video on the new shield skill buffs, you know that this thing was hitting for about 250% more damage on the top end, and it's basically something I'm using to kill bosses, kill rares, but it's also useful for clearing groups thanks to Trampletoes. Trampletoes gives us a bit of AoE chaining based on overkill damage, so we're getting a pretty big assist from those boosts as far as shield charging mobs and rares, but also since I am spec'd as Avatar of Fire, we are getting some strong single target and ignite damage off of shield charge, which honestly just makes it feel like a better version of Perfect Strike. They also buffed it up in a few other small ways, like actually blocking while you're charging and activating Magma Barrier on use, etc. And as a quick note on Magma Barrier with shield charge, at first I thought it was a bit of a meme, but honestly, and this takes some practice, you can activate shield charge in a way that kills the mobs immediately in front of you with Magma Barrier, and then you charge forward and collide with another group of mobs, which actually feels like efficient clearing. Obviously, while shield charge is on cooldown, or if I'm in the middle of a pack, I might use resonating shield instead, but as a challenge I pose to you all, try getting the Magma Barrier timing down with shield charge. Not only does it help clear more quickly, but as a bonus, it just feels really badass charging through a bunch of fire and explosions just to collide with a huge group of enemies and ultimately blowing them up as well. Alright, there's a lot to say about that skill, but really I think I could sum it up as this. Shield charge is clearly the new MVP, but Magma Barrier is still going to win best support. And real quick, I'm just going to mouse over the support gems. These are all just aimed at cranking up the damage as much as possible. Obviously, exploit weakness is for bossing. We want to make sure we're consuming broken armor when shield charging, because that's a huge 40% more damage boost, so that's basically the one thing I'd pay attention to here. Next, we have Infernal Cry. Pretty straightforward. I won't spend too much time here, but you want to use this to empower your shield charges. That's basically what this boils down to. And Bone Shatters, I guess, when you want to throw the odd one out to mop up again or to clear a group when shield charge is on cooldown, etc. And real quick for support gems, we're still using Premeditation, just more empowerment damage, but also Raging Cry and Enraged War Cry. This one will give you rage as long as you're hitting things with the shout. Bosses will give you 20 rage every time, while this one will actually consume rage to make your empowered hits even harder, so it's kind of cool having both in one ability. Though just to be clear, for Enraged War Cry to go off, I'm pretty sure you have to have 10 rage before you shout, so it's not like you can shout and you get both effects, so just something to keep in mind. And then Magma Barrier, it's still here. We basically already went over this with shield charge, but this is an ability that will activate whenever you use Raise Shield, Resonating Shield, or Shield Charge. It's a short window, about a half a second, but you can increase it with Gem Cutter's Prisms, though definitely prioritize using those on Shield Charge or Infernal Cry first. And yeah, this is just a huge support and damage, and it often inflicts Ignite. We'll just have to see what the damage looks like as I am fully decked out, but even now it can wipe out map mobs in just one use of the skill, so it's still quite strong. But yeah, they definitely changed the endgame scaling. If you stacked enough plus melee, you could like get 1.5 million, 2 million listed DPS. It was crazy. So now you're going to get about 100k, 150k reasonably so. For support gems, we have Ignition, which gives it 100% more chance to ignite. Honestly, I don't know if I need this. I kind of want to slot something in that will help it do more damage, because I'm pretty sure with the damage it already deals, it will ignite most of the time. So this is just here as a placeholder, honestly. We'll see what I play around with. And then we have Reach, which is a pretty big AoE boost at the cost of accuracy rating, but as we'll go over in a bit, accuracy rating really doesn't matter for us. And then we have Fire Mastery, pretty much the only fire skill I think that we can socket this into with this current build, giving us a pretty good chunk of damage, though I think it will add even more later as I get like higher level skill gems and better gear. So this is going to be here for now and will probably stay here. All right, next up we got Overwhelming Presence for reducing enemies' elemental ailment threshold and stun threshold. This will help us get heavy stuns off a lot more quickly, but more importantly, we'll be igniting things more often. And as you'll see later, we have a few passive skill tree nodes that greatly boost our damage against burning and ignited enemies, as I mentioned before, so it makes sense to run this for now. And I have Cannibalism socketed into this. Again, I think this is just another one of those quintessential spirit support gems. It's just life recovered on kills, so definitely have this socketed in somewhere on one of your auras. And then we have Resonating Shield. It's honestly been feeling really good. Its damage was slightly buffed in the last update, and it basically serves as a way to get Magma Barrier to trigger while shield charges on cooldown while we're mapping. And we're also currently running Scavenge Plating, so we're getting some extra armor there. However, it has a pretty strong role against bosses as well. As I mentioned earlier, we're taking advantage of the Exploit Weakness support gem, so we're basically using this to break armor on bosses over and over again so that shield charge can hit even harder. I say over and over, but honestly bosses have been dying really quick regardless. I basically use it like this in a boss fight. I'll start out by just channeling this ability while blocking and avoiding their attacks. Obviously I'll try to get a Magma Barrier off too if it makes sense, but once their armor is broken, I'll shield charge without using Infernal Cry, which will usually inflict enough stun buildup to get them primed for stun. And since Bone Shatter is socketed with Devastate, as we said earlier, we use Bone Shatter to heavy stun the boss and fully break their armor again. And that's when I'll use Infernal Cry into another shield charge for the big hits. I'm also running Flammability, so I'll cast that in there at some point to increase the damage as well, usually right after the first armor break. It's been working really well so far, and I plan on continuing this combo for as long as it's blasting them. So yeah, Resonating Shield has a pretty important role here. Obviously, we're not taking full advantage of the broken armor debuff since we're not dealing physical damage, but that's okay. We still want to use the Exploit Weakness support gem for that 40% extra damage, even if it is all fire damage. And support gems real quick, we have Overpower still socketed here. This is honestly here as a backup. In case you mistime a Magma Barrier, you can channel Resonating Shield for a tick or two, and it will prime things for stun usually, so you can just Bone Shatter them. And don't get me wrong, you should be timing your Magma Barriers, but Resonating Shield breaking armor is actually really useful since we're using Scavenge Plating as well, so it is useful to tag like a group of mobs every now and then to break their armor and just get that huge buff to your own armor, so something to keep in mind. We also have Rage socketed here. Again, if you're hitting things with the Shockwave or Resonating Shield, even if it's just one tick, you're going to start building up Rage if you're going quickly enough through maps, so I find the buff over time pretty strong, especially since we have the Font of Rage socketed into Solar Orb. You'll often get 30 Rage, like the maximum Rage, pretty quickly, which is an extra 30% more damage while you're mapping or while you're bossing, etc. So pretty useful. And then we have Armor Explosion here. Honestly, just to queue more things up for stun is kind of what I'm seeing here. It kind of chains a bit, so you'll often chain more things for a Bone Shatter, prime more things for a stun with Armor Explosion. So that's basically the reasoning there. And real quick, I've been talking about this already, but we have Scavenge Plating, obviously, so we're increasing our own armor as we break the armor of mobs and bosses. Pretty straightforward. Then I have it socketed with Persistence so that the armor that we gain from breaking armor lasts a bit longer. It's pretty useful on this one. And Warm Blooded, just kind of as a filler. Freezing is pretty terrible in this game, and just being able to reduce the duration is really useful. And I have a bunch of extra spirits, so might as well throw this in here. And lastly, we have Flammability, obviously here to assist with high fire resistant enemies and bosses. I usually only use this against bosses or stubbornly resistant rares since we are dealing nothing but fire damage, and we're already intelligence stacking for Solar Orb, so it just makes sense to run this because it has a relatively low intelligence requirement, and obviously the one weakness of running all fire damage is fire resistance, so this obviously helps with that. And for now, I just have Focused Curse socketed into this. This is the most important one, I think, just having it go off a little faster. I need to play around with some other options and how to boost this a little bit, but that's what it's looking like for now. But yeah, guys, those are the skills in a nutshell. Next, we'll talk about the passive skill tree. I'm going to go over what this looked like in the early to mid game for me, for you guys interested in starting warriors or just want to see what the route that I took. But then obviously I'll go over what my skill tree looks like today for end game stuff. Again, just skip the early game, mid game chapters below if you want to get to that more quickly. But for now, let's see where it all started. Alright, so I went ahead and refunded all of my passive skill tree points just so we can better visualize what my early game and mid game builds look like. Obviously ignore the ascendancy for now, we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, for the earliest part of my playthrough, this is essentially what my passive skill tree looked like. And for the earliest moments of your playthrough, I think it would be good to work towards your skill tree looking like this. I mean, honestly, I think you should probably go with this route first. You could go this way, I guess, for more melee damage, but I'm thinking about later and trying to optimize my passive skill tree points spent. And this will take 1 extra point to get to this notable passive rather than going this route, and this notable passive is really useful. Brutal is just a great early game combination of stun buildup, melee damage, and strength. Then I usually progress right down here to this notable passive right after that, Sturdy Metal, getting more armor from the chest pieces there, and then we go this way to grab Relentless, which is just more armor, more maximum life per second, and more strength, and then I go down here to grab Defender's Resolve. Those were how my earliest levels were spent. The block chance is obviously useful on this one, but also emptying the heavy stun bar a little bit faster because we're using Magma Barrier a lot, so early on you want to make sure you can get rid of that stun buildup in some way. But yeah, I like progressing down this way after grabbing Brutal because it sets a good foundation for tankiness before you progress down this path here, and I'm not even kidding, I think you should just straight shoot it all the way down to Resolute Technique. This makes it so your attacks cannot critically strike, but also they cannot be evaded, and you will notice that your attacks, especially your Bone Shatters, are whiffing a bit towards the end of Act 1, and it feels terrible. Trust me, this is a huge damage increase overall because the misses feel terrible, and then you also don't have to worry about building accuracy or anything, etc. Super important key passive in my opinion. I honestly never level a warrior without it. And then after grabbing Resolute Technique, that's when I would start putting points into one of the weapon trees here. Obviously one-hander, since this is the build we're going with, probably fill these out, and this is actually really useful with the plus 15 dexterity for the support gems we're using. We're using quite a bit of dexterity support gems, so I do like this one quite a bit. But yeah, grabbing all these will boost your damage even more in the early game, things like Bone Shatter, Mace Strike, Molten Blast, etc. Then I would probably grab these like Strength and Stun Threshold nodes here, and I would probably progress down here as well to grab these hit nodes. This is a lot of hit damage, even though it reduces your swing speed, but because we just grabbed this one, which increases our swing speed, actually both of these nodes do, it's really not too much of a minus. I think you're still netting swing speed actually. You're getting more swing speed after speccing into this and grabbing these. So honestly, overall, pretty useful. But we're slowly starting to get to Act 3 territory, so let me just go ahead and distribute the rest of these points real quick, and we'll take a look at what the mid-game skill tree looks like. Alright, so this is basically what my build looked like as I was progressing through Cruel. The playstyle was similar for the most part, but I wanted to talk about a few things. To start off, let's go over the Ascendancy. Obviously, I chose Smith of Kitava, and to start off, I don't think this should surprise anybody, but you go Coal Stoker. Yeah, just fire resistance into Coal Stoker. It's just too strong. It takes care of almost all of your elemental resistance issues with one stat being fire resistance, and it makes you take less damage during your campaign playthrough, but it's also really easy to get resistance caps before you even start maps, so I definitely recommend it. The second set of points I threw into fire damage and Heat of the Forge. Obviously, make sure you have enough intelligence to utilize the fire spell on hit. I think you just need like 34 intelligence to cast the lowest level of Solar Orb. I could be misremembering, so don't quote me on that. Truth be told, for the longest time, I did not have anything socketed in fire spell on hit early, just because I was being lazy, honestly, and Shield Charge, Perfect Strikes were doing plenty of damage, but yeah, that's on me. You could maybe throw this extra point somewhere else, like the 20% melee damage around here, if you don't want to utilize fire spell on hit quite yet, so you don't feel like you're wasting this point either, but that's up to you. Anyways, moving on. So as for the rest of the tree, I think that I found a shield that had a bunch of armor on it and was realizing how much damage Shield Charge was doing, so it made me know I wanted it to ignite or deal some kind of status ailment, and you can see over here I went ahead and got the Avatar of Fire Keystone passive. However, I would not take this until I've grabbed the fire nodes here, up here, and even over here, because if we read the Keystone passive description, it's really short: 75% of damage converted to fire damage, deal no non-fire damage. So what does that mean? For a lot of abilities, it's going to result in around 25% decrease in damage, unless it's something that's already converting to fire damage, like Perfect Strike, Molten Blast, the Fiery Fisher move, etc. So that's why you want to make sure you have enough fire damage boosting nodes to make Avatar of Fire worth it. So just, that's definitely something to keep in mind before you grab this one. I do like this notable passive here, Overheating Blow. We are heavy stunning a lot, and this helps early on with fire resistant enemies a bit. Then we eventually want to progress up to here and grab Blood Magic, because you start feeling the mana cost of some of your abilities in Cruel. Oops, I forgot to fill these in. We also want to grab these block chance nodes into Towering Shield. It gives you a 25% increased chance to block if you've blocked with active block recently. That's all I'll block, but we're doing this all the time with Magma Barrier, and this also activates when blocking with Resonating Shield and Shield Charge, so it just feels feels like a free chunk of block chance. Oh, and real quick, I should mention some of these nodes here are the ones I was talking about earlier, where we're dealing a lot more damage to ignited or burning enemies, Fulmination being one of them, and Sigil of Fire being the other. So that's 70% more damage against burning or / ignited enemies. Pretty useful. And yeah, it made sense to progress up to this branch using this path here, just because I was thinking of slightly ahead in the future, I'm going to probably grab these AoE nodes. And you know, this is more or less what my build looked like overall when progressing through Cruel. But for now, let's talk about what my build currently looks like. Alright, so quite a bit stays in place. I've mostly just added onto the skeleton we built with the previous sections, but I've also shifted some things around. Notably, we straight up just don't need these one-handed damage nodes anymore. We're dealing all fire damage, and we're still getting some, damage out of the fire nodes we've spec'd into for mace skills, but I'm not really using any weapon skills other than Bone Shatter at this point. Really, all I need is Magma Barrier on Resonating Shield and Shield Charge. Oh, and real quick, for the third set of Ascendancy points, we grabbed the Fire Resistance here and Forged in Flame. Modifiers to maximum fire resistance also grant maximum cold and lightning resistances, due to this node down here, as a lot of you are probably aware of. I mean, most of you know about Unnatural Resilience already. It was nerfed by about half in the most recent patch. I'll just read the tooltip real quick. So plus 5% to all elemental resistances, 1% to maximum fire resistance for each 40% uncapped fire resistance. That used to be 2% to maximum fire resistance, so that's the portion that got nerfed. Understandably so, because with the Smith of Kitava Ascendancy, it was easy to overcap all of your elemental resistances, but it honestly still kind of is. I mean, this still has great synergy with this Ascendancy. You basically just need to stack a bunch of fire resistance, and that'll take care of almost all of your resistance and overcapped resistance needs. You just need to do something about chaos resistance. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we cranked up the AoE a bit with these nodes here, grab some strength down here. I'm still toying with the idea of going Giant's Blood, but to be honest, I don't really feel a strong need to. Just one-handed and shield has been working out just fine. I may instead lean into intelligence and go for a more hybrid route, for my armor and abilities. Also, funnily enough, swing speed decreases don't really have the worst effect on this build because we're barely using any mace strikes. So I went ahead and grabbed these ailment magnitude nodes here and the magnitude or the duration to damaging ailments on enemies node. These all decrease your swing speed as well, but again, it only really affects Resonating Shield from what I noticed. I mean, the rest is fine. And these magnitude nodes are now helping the ignite inflicted by our very hard-hitting shield charges, and now they do a ton of work. It's really amazing. But that's pretty much what my passive skill tree is looking like currently. I think I may progress up here eventually to grab some of these block nodes to make it easier to cap on block. I think I may also spec out of these nodes here. These are just maximum fire resistance, elemental resistance nodes here. Honestly, all of that I feel like is going to be taken care of by Unnatural Resilience, so just some off-the-cuff thoughts. I may also spec into these nodes here just so I can get to this one, War Cries Empower an additional attack, just so that I can have 2 empowered shield charges to start a boss fight off with. That feels like it'd be a little stronger. But anyways, there will be a link to this build down in the details section of this video, so please take a look. I'll go over anointments and gems and things like this when I have further optimized this build, as I am just grinding through tier 8 maps at the moment. But as always, let's go over what my gear currently looks like. So honestly, this might be the most compelling part of this build, but I have barely spent anything on this gear. I think I spent maybe 23 Exalteds to get it online. Really, the lion's share of that cost is going towards Trampletoes here. Obviously, this no longer one-shots bosses, but it's still an MVP for clearing maps very quickly. I may actually spec out of some of those area of effect nodes in the passive skill tree, because this has been helping me clear screens well enough. And these weren't even that expensive. I think I got them for 20 Exalted, so in my opinion, this should be the first thing you buy, as it'll just make your map grinding efficient from the get-go. Obviously, you have to be dealing a lot of damage to take advantage of the overkill effect and the chaining, so that's where your shield comes in. Just buy a high armor shield when you start maps. It doesn't have to be a god tier like 1.2k plus armor shield, but I think I found one with 800 armor for 3 Exalted that I was rolling with for a while. This is obviously not that shield, but when I was first starting maps, I only had 800 armor on it and some fire resistance for 3 Exalted. Seriously, super cheap, guys. This current shield cost me more like 20 Exalted, but other than that, hopefully you saved up a good chunk of fire resistance gear from the campaign playthroughs, so that makes it a little easier to cap your resistances when you're starting maps. You should also try to find higher armor pieces, because it can be easy to overlook when you're just tunnel visioning, elemental resistances. Oh yeah, let me mouse over my gear at this point, but yeah, I'm trying to make a good balance of elemental resistances and stats for the things that I need, but this is currently the set that I'm rocking with. You can see there's a bit of extra spirit on there because I'm rolling rolling with 3 auras. Though obviously if you can't roll with 3, I would recommend Magma Barrier in time of need. Scavenge Plating is a nice bonus, but sometimes I feel like I don't get a ton of value out of it because Magma Barrier and Trampletoes often just melts groups before resonating can break the armor. Obviously important rolls are fire resistance and chaos resistance and armor. You can see I'm a bit behind on my chaos resistance, so I'm going to spend some time on trade to fix that soon. You should also be stacking plus melee skills wherever possible, which are your gloves here, your weapon, and your amulet. My amulet is currently missing plus melee, so that's another thing I got to trade for. Also increased elemental damage with attacks should be on your weapon. That's also a very important roll. That gives you more damage with pretty much everything you're using because all of our attacks are fire damage. And yep, as I said before, this build hinges around having a hard-hitting shield, so crank up that armor as much as possible. I think my corruption actually took away some of the armor on this shield, but that's okay. Still has a good bit, and it gave me like a ton of block chance. I think I went from 30% block to 50%, so honestly I'm fine with it. This can definitely be upgraded at some point though, so I'm keeping an eye out. But yeah guys, that's the build. If I'm being honest, I think this is the most fun I've had on Warrior, no joke. Charging through and demolishing things while timing your Magma Barrier feels so good, and also being able to like weave in bone shatters. You know, even though we're not the most mobile class, it's kind of cool feeling like you are this unstoppable force as you just explode your way through maps without slowing down at times. It honestly feels really good. That's gonna be it guys. I'm gonna leave you with some gameplay clips as always. Keep an eye out for the more endgame version of this build as I continue to optimize things and progress. There's a certain unique I have my eye on, and we're gonna see how that changes things. I'll also likely be hitting up the hardcore solo self-found league at some point, so also keep an eye out for content on that. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.